Gary Dartnall is one of the most iconic people in British entertainment history. His CV looks, well, like nobody else's, really. He's been chairman and chief executive of Thorn EMI Films, Thorn EMI Video, Elstree Studios, which is just really an absolutely historic place on the media map here. ABC Cinemas 2, which is the biggest cinema chain in the UK. In the States, Gary's been chairman for some time of the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, that's BAFTA, in Los Angeles. And for his services to the British entertainment industry, he was awarded the OBE. So, Gary, my first question to you is, what's your passion? Is it doing deals, or is it just sitting in the cinema eating popcorn?
No, it's seeing deals come to fruition, seeing the things that we started, working their way through and finally succeeding. It's terrific when you have a film and the film opens and you go to the theater and there are lines around the block. That's terrific.
Yeah.
I remember that happening with Murder on the Orient Express.
Oh, wow.
We were never sure in America how Murder on the Orient Express would work. I'm talking about the original one.
Yeah.
And it was opening in New York, and I went to the opening. I had delivered it to Paramount, who were the distributors at the time, and they were sort of iffy about it being very English, And
too English.
And when I got to the theater, there were lines around the block, and that was very exciting.
Fantastic, yeah. So it's success that drives you then, is it?
In a way, yes, I would say it's success.
Yeah. Would you receive direct pitches from producers and directors? Would they come into your office and say, Gary, I've got this great project. I want you to back it?
Yes, that would happen. Years ago, when Jeremy Thomas was making The Last Emperor, for example, it was tough. The Bertolucci picture was tough for him to get the financing together for the picture. And he'd come and see me. And then finally, the picture was made, highly acclaimed, won an Academy Award. And I said to him, you must feel absolutely vindicated of all this work you had to do to make it happen. And he said, Gary, if I'd known how hard it was going to be, I'd never have started it.
Really? Why do people produce films? What drives them?
Making a picture. Sorry?
Why do people produce films? What drives a producer to do that?
Hopefully a creative instinct, that they read a book or know a story, and that drives them to feel that it should be a wider audience and that it can be a wider audience. And in his mind, he has the thought of a writer, director, and cast that would put it together. It's a creative process. It becomes a team effort, and the producer is driven by that, I think. That's his, the brass ring, and then the success, if it works.
Yeah.
What I'm not very happy about is the producers or directors who do it only for themselves, and they don't care about the public's taste. Yeah. Or they say that. They say, I'm doing this because I believe in it and I want it and I'm going to create it, and I don't care what other people think. They forget that they have financial investors.
Sure.
That there are others involved.
Yeah.
And they have an obligation to them. And that they really have to create. And I don't know anybody, I have never met anybody really creative who didn't want to share that vision with other people. Yeah. If you go to a museum and you see the artist's work, don't you think those artists wanted people to admire his work, admire his paintings? He wasn't doing it just for himself. He was doing it for the world.
Yeah. So what are some of the best, you name some names, what are some of the best pitches from producers or directors you've had?
I loved Passage to India with David Lean.
Yeah.
It was great fun working on that.
How did you pitch it to you? How did you sell it to you?
David called me. I got a call from David Lean saying, Gary, do you want to use Eastman Color or Technicolor?
Just like that.
So David Lean, You know what's the best for your picture, whether it's Eastern color or whether you want it the color. But it was nice of him to ask anyway. Yeah. And we went to the Oscars together. And he was an editor before he became a director. And Coates actually was a great friend of mine and worked with him on a number of his pictures and won an Oscar for Lawrence of Arabia and so on. And we were up against Amadeus.
All right.
It was a tough night for us.
Yeah.
Because Amadeus was taking, a lot of the awards that we would have got. Yeah. Anyway, do you know how I got into this, how I started in the first
Yeah, go on. Definitely.
Okay. Well, my dad worked for a man called William Fox. William Fox of the Fox Film Company. Okay?
Right. Yes.
And I have here in my house a presentation tea service to my father from William Fox, 1922, 1923.
That was before talkies.
Yes, they didn't come in until 1928. These were old, silent, black and white movies.
Wow.
That they would rent to movie theaters, Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
In fact, William Fox started doing that. He started by having movie theaters that were Nickelodeons, that were sort of shop fronts, because he liked moving pictures. Yeah. His problem was he couldn't get any. There was a shortage of film. So he started producing films. So the Fox Film Company were producing so that he had something to show to the audience who would come to his theaters.
Yeah.
And there are still Fox theaters in various places. Here in Los Angeles, in Westwood, there's the big Fox theater, so. But he wanted to merge with another company and was negotiating with them and borrowed quite a lot of money to do the deal. The deal failed, and he was found to be bribing the bankruptcy judge.
Oh, really?
Did time.
He did time. Oh, my God.
The company was not in a good situation. But there was a young man called Darryl Zanuck who had just started the company, 20th Century.
Yeah.
And merged. So it became 20th Century Fox.
Yeah. Wow. I never knew that. I never knew. And that was your dad?
No. When my dad, he worked for William Fox.
He worked for William Fox. So it's in your blood.
Yeah, he died when I was about 18. And a number of film people came to his funeral. And one of them, who was the chairman of Associated British Picture Corporation, it was called in those days, ABPC, McGregor Scott, said to me, "Is there anything I can do for you?" He was just being nice to the son of an old friend. And I said, well, a screen test would be great. I wanted to be an actor.
Did you?
But I wasn't photogenic, so it didn't work. So I said, I love film. I was with a Bristol repertory company, weekly rep in Bristol. And, we do a different play every week. And so we rehearse every morning. We do matinees Wednesdays and Saturdays. And when we weren't rehearsing or doing a matinee, I would always go to the cinema because I love film. Okay. So I said, anything I can do, but in some other parts of the business. And so he said, yeah, but you're a bum, you know nothing about business. So I got a job selling ladies' raincoats. That should have been good in England, right?
Yeah, totally.
I went out for training with their star salesman. And he used to wear a Homburg hat and a three-piece suit with a gold chain. He was a big, tall guy, 6 foot tall. And so when it was my turn, I bought a three-piece suit, but I didn't buy a Homburg hat because I looked stupid, but I bought a bowler hat. Okay. And when I went into the department, to the raincoat department, carrying my suitcases of samples, they'd all fall about laughing at this, 15-year-old kid coming in with suitcases of samples and a bowler hat. I couldn't sell them. I was refused. And so I was in the stockroom and I called my father's friend and I said, I've got business experience. I've been a commercial traveler. Wow. And maybe the death of a salesman, I'm not sure, but he took pity. And it just happened at that stage that their international salesman, the international manager, wanted an assistant. So I got the job. So that's how I got into the film industry. And what I had to do in the beginning was deal with third world countries. People from third world countries would come into the office on Wardour Street, and I'd show them the publicity, and they'd choose which ones they'd want to see, and I would arrange a screening. And then they'd turn up with all their cousins and their nephews. They just wanted to see a film. They didn't buy anything. And at the Berlin Festival, I was approached by a company called British Lion.
Oh, yeah.
Lion was run by John and Roy Bolting.
Yeah, famous.
Sidney Gilliam. The Bolting brothers, who made all those early Peter Sellers, I'm All Right, Jack, Two-Way Stretch. And Frank Launder and Sidney Gilliam, who made the Centrillions movies.
Yeah.
They approached because they had never, ever made any sort of business outside Europe. They did very well in Europe, but they'd never. So here was a young man, early 20s, willing to travel. And so they would send me everywhere between Istanbul and Tokyo.
Wow.
India to Burma, Vietnam before the war really hit in Vietnam, before it came into Saigon, to all of these places, making deals on British comedies.
So what did you have with you to sell? Did you have rolls of film and a projector and set it up, or how did you sell it?
I tried that with a roll of 16 millimeter trailers. Okay. I got as far as Istanbul and they confiscated it.
They took it from you.
With the censor and everybody and his brother. It was on the basis of press books and stills. And I'll tell you a story about that. I was in my hotel room in Cairo, and some people called me to say, let's go for dinner. And I was leaving very early the next morning on a Pan Am flight that was leaving at about 2:00 in the morning. And so I told them that, and they said, well, pack your bag, we'll pick you up, and we will take you to the airport after we've had dinner. So I did that, and we went for dinner at the casino in Cairo. I don't gamble, so I'm sitting at the restaurant part of the casino, and they're down on the floor gambling, and a guy comes over, I don't know, he sits down, he's got a pile of chips, and of course he says to me, hello, what do you do? And I told him I was in the movie business. Everybody, traditionally had two businesses, whatever they did, and the movie business.
And the movie business. Mm.
So he was interested in the movie business. And he said, well, what are you doing here in Egypt? And I said, I'm looking for importers of my company's films. Because in those days, Peter, if you licensed a film to a small country like that, you did it on a flat 5-year license. At the end of the 5 years, you got your film back and you relicensed it. I was making a pitch once to Cazenove, the bank in the city.
Yeah.
I described it as being, because they didn't know anything about film, and I described it as if it's a block of flats, and you own these flats, and you rent them out under a lease, and then when the lease expires, you rent them again. And that's what I was doing with these films, renting them. They'd come back, you'd rent them again, you keep going as long as there were sprocket holes. Yeah. So this guy said to me, okay, so can I rent one? I said, sure. So I had my briefcase with me at the hat check area. So I went to get my briefcase, and I had the stills and the press books. So what reminded me when you asked about that. So I showed him the stills and the press books. Now, most of them were black and white, Peter Sellers comedies or the Centrillion. But there was one, a rather low-budget version of Macbeth made by the BBC that I had in my kit. And he looked at this, and it had men on horses, 2 horses, that's all their budget would allow, I think, and a woman with a dagger. And I think he thought it was Ben-Hur or something, costume, action piece. So he said, can I have this one? And I said, yeah, sure. I mean, it was pretty awful. Anyway, we agreed a deal. He gave me all his chips as the down payment. I was going to go back to London and then send him a contract. He'd open a letter of credit and all would be well. Okay. So I get on the plane to go back to London. And in those days, Egypt and Syria were one country called the United Arab Republic. And there'd been an assassination attempt on King Hussein. And the assassin had been tried in his absence and sentenced to death because he got away. That was the guy I just made the deal with.
Really? He was very fond of black and white British films.
I thought, wait till you see my version of Macbeth and realize that it's not Ben-Hur. I'll be the next one on his list.
That's pretty cool.
We sent him a contract with me. I think the Jordan police got to him before my contract.
This was the boom period of film, wasn't it? I mean, it sounds like you could have just gone out there and sold anything to anyone.
In those days, there was rivalry between exhibition and television. Television was starting in the 60s, and there was very strong rivalry between television and the theater in such a way. For example, when I was in Japan, which was the biggest market I was responsible for between Istanbul and Tokyo, the Japanese exhibitors had told the studios that if anybody were to sell a film to television, they would never play their films in the theaters. They would boycott that studio's films because of the rivalry between the theaters and the television, you see. There was a guy kept coming to my hotel to try to get me to sell him films for television. And I kept saying to him, Ben, I can't make a deal with you. If I do, they'll never play my company's films in the theaters. Well, this went on. I was there for about a month. And I was leaving. It was my last night. And he was there again, as usual, in the lobby and said, let's make a deal, Gary. And I said, but Banjero-san, I told you I can't make a deal because if I do, they won't show my films in the theaters. He said, Gary, face it, they're not showing your films in the theaters anyway. I'd been there a month and I hadn't made a deal with anyone. He was right. Okay. So I made a deal with him for $100,000, which in those days was quite a lot for a group of films for television. So I got on the plane to go back to London with some trepidation that I had, breached the etiquette and made the deal and they wouldn't be able to sell their films to the theaters anymore. When I got back to London, I was greeted as a hero because they never had $100,000 from any of these countries before, certainly not Japan. And when the opportunity came up for somebody to replace the man in New York in the office that they had in New York, because they thought this kid had done okay in the Far East, they sent him to New York. That's how I got to America. I think thanks to this Japanese, not because I was a brilliant salesman, but because he was insistent on pushing until we made the deal.
Yeah. You know what? It reminds me a lot, actually, of what's been going on these past few years between the cinemas and operations like Netflix.
Oh, absolutely. It's the industry is changing so much, Peter, in the way we promote and advertise. These days we're using the internet in order to promote.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
We don't take full pages in the Times anymore, all of it's now we're using that from independent producers' point of view. At the moment, there are many other places they can go. Now, it used to be, and now we're jumping around a bit, it used to be that companies like Netflix rely on the studios for their product. Well, the studios have started their own websites now. Their own streaming sites. They're not selling their films at the same degree to Netflix. So Netflix, if they want to keep their subscriber base, has to step up and become producers themselves. Why we see.
So a year or two ago, Scorsese did The Irishman, didn't he? And that was, I think it was Netflix. It was definitely Netflix, but it also, I think, simultaneously had a theatrical release.
Yes, they're paying
unusual.
Well, it's almost a different audience. I am optimistic that people will always want to go and see a film together. the atmosphere you get with an audience is totally different than the atmosphere you get sitting at home with a drink watching television.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
The demographics are different.
Yeah.
Young people really want to go out. So it's more the special effects blockbusters. This last weekend in America, the big bucks came in from Avatar. It's those type of spectacular films.
Yeah, tentpole movies, really. But isn't that dangerous? Because, if the studios fail, for a 6 month, 12 months to produce any major tentpole movies, you've got a whole chain of cinemas that's going to go bust.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very tricky time. And from an independent producer's point of view, there are more outlets than there have ever been, because you can go directly to the streamers and cut out the theatrical release. And you can get $2 million from a streamer for your film, And of course, there's always the international markets, although the international markets are going the same way. The key international markets, you'll find streamers today. Now, that from an independence point of view means that there are more outlets, more places for your product. So with your viewers being writers, the more writing that they can do for all of those various right for your audience, and the audiences are different now.
Yeah, very much so.
Divided a little bit between.
Yeah, I mean, Gary, clearly your heart, and soul probably are with cinemas, because that was, where you were brought up. But looking ahead, 10 years, a decade ahead, do you really think cinema is going to be with us? Yes,
absolutely. But when I took over the circuit, the ABC circuit, cinema attendance was down a lot. I'm talking about the early 80s, to such a degree that the American studios were sending over used prints to England. They weren't even making new prints for exhibition because the attendances were so low.
Yeah.
And the theater owners, Rank and ABC, weren't spending any money. Rank was spending money on Xerox and other businesses.
Yeah.
Really weren't paying a lot of attention to exhibition.
Yeah.
It was tough for me to get from the board, because you see, back in the days when those theaters were built, people went there on buses, right? Now, there are no car parks, and people want to go on their cars. At that time, freeways, open highways were starting, and ring roads were coming in. And as those ring roads were coming in and shopping centers were being built, it was great for the landlord of the shopping center to put a cinema in the basement of some of the areas that he had.
Yeah, sure.
And plenty of parking. So went through the change of people not going to the cinema because there was nowhere to park and they were run down in the early 80s. I mean, we had one on Fulham Road, the Forum on Fulham Road. And when I first went to that, do you know the cinema?
No, I don't think it's there anymore. Is it?
When I first went there, well, it's got a different name, but it's a good catchment area. Such a residential catchment area.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, wealthy.
In Kensington, on the High Street, the Odeon Kensington High Street.
Yeah, I know that.
Great theatres because of the catchment area. But Forum, when I first went to see it, they had a very small concession stand. That lady would come down in the intermission with a tray.
Yes, I do remember that, actually. Oh, yes. Yeah.
In America, you make a good percentage of your income from the concession. Right?
Yeah.
And they would have some hot dogs, but there were mirrors behind the place where they cooked the hot dogs. And because of the steam coming out, the mirrors had cracked. So they stuck
They got it into your stomach.
I mean, it really was awful.
Yeah.
And you go from one theater into the next, nobody would check you or anything like that. Anyway, I persuaded the board to spend some money. And we redid the theater. We put in a big concession stand, and the carpets. I said, why are the carpets so unattractive? Oh, well, if people drop things on them or throw them, they're patterned so it won't show. Can you believe it? Anyway, we got through it and attendances went back up. Attendances have been pretty good. And then
the moral of the story is you've just got to make it an irresistible experience for people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Take the customer and let them come. Because the films are pretty good.
Yeah.
The films are pretty good, but you've got to make it something that people want to do.
Yeah. Tell us about some of the. Who's the nicest actor you've ever worked with?
The nicest actor. I don't know. They've all been pretty good. On one occasion, I was doing a picture, and the lead actor that we had was taking so much cocaine he couldn't work. No.
Would you care to drop a name or two?
No, I can't.
Is he alive still? Is he alive still?
What?
Is he alive still?
We were, yeah.
You better not mention him then.
Character parts, Peter. Character parts. We were preparing costuming. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we were ready to start shooting, pretty much. And he just couldn't work. And for our good luck, in a way, he got on the Concorde and he flew to Florida. Michael Caine stepped in at very short notice. Asking me who I really enjoyed working with. There were many. They were all good. But Michael stepped in very quickly, took over the part, and that was great. Then the other guy, who we fired, sued us for wrongful dismissal.
Wow.
Lost the case because he left the area. Nothing to do with the cocaine or anything.
Really?
Left the area. And if you're working and shooting and you're in the picture, you can't just walk away. And he got on a plane and flew to Florida.
Amazing.
While in preparation for costuming.
And tell us about some of the most difficult actors.
Well, I can't remember now.
Yes, you can. Come on, Gary. Of course you can. You can tell. It's just between us.
One of the problems we had was the restaurant at Elstree used to serve booze. So we had some actors could work in the morning and they were fucking useless in the afternoon. Some actor with a bus, he fell off the bus. That was the more difficult part. So Andy Mitchell, who ran the studio for me, we had to cut out the booze.
Yeah, I would think so.
A bar. No, they can go to an evening or they go to a pub at Elstree or something like that. But what we didn't want is the actors getting drunk at lunchtime.
Oh, that's a very good first rule of production, basically. Stay sober. Did you ever come across Weinstein? What did you think of him?
Harvey?
Yeah.
Oh, of course, because, in the beginning, he was quite an Anglophile.
Yeah.
He was importing, buying the rights to and importing and distributing in America.
That's right. He had very good taste, actually. He did buy some classic British films and made a success out of them.
Absolutely. And a friend of mine was making a picture and he couldn't get the financing for it. But financiers insisted on certain cast. You know what it's like. I mean, you and I going through it on another picture. It's a chicken and an egg.
Yeah.
You can't get the money without the cast, and you can't get the cast without the money. And that was the case in this producer. And he went to Harvey, and Harvey agreed to put up the money. So there were occasions when, he did very good things for the British industry.
But as a person, what did you make to him as a person?
All the time I wasn't aware of. I mean, we dealt with him as a distributor. Miramax was the distributor that a number of us used for our films, and he was, an Anglophile.
Yeah. I never met him. I did know a number of the people who worked for him in London, and I think they all had a very, very difficult time with him. In fact, one of them came out to have a meeting with me, and he just looked like he'd been in a boxing ring, gone 15 rounds with someone. He said, "I've been Harveyed."
He was not an easy person to deal with.
No, he was bloody impossible, really.
he made it easier for me because he wanted my pictures.
Yeah.
And he wanted to.
So he could be quite charming, I suppose, as well, couldn't he?
Well, I wouldn't say charming. That maybe
might be too much. Yeah.
At least willing.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's just down the road from you, isn't he, at the moment, I think, for the next 150 years or something.
Yeah.
Dear, oh dear. What about writers? I mean, writers on movies. And how much contact did you have with them, and how easy? What do you think of them as a species?
Well, I think they're terrific, because without the writers and without a script, you've got nothing. I mean, it all starts with the written word. It's all about the script. I mean, no matter how much you have an idea, unless you can transport that idea onto a page that can be spoken. So the writer, I think, is of extreme importance.
How do you find writers are generally? Do you find them the very vulnerable, insecure creatures?
So, on one occasion, a guy came to see me with a friend of his, and they had written a spec script on a film that I owned, an old Buster Keaton movie. And he'd written a spec script, and his friend had said to him, well, before you try to offer it to anybody or do anything with it, you better talk to the owner of the rights. So they came to see me to get an option. Now, I knew they didn't have any money, so I couldn't ask them for any money for an option. So I said, listen, nobody has made this film before. It's tough. So I'll give you a free option, and come back in 6 months. I'll give you 6 months to see what you can do, and keep in touch. And so they had a free option for 6 months. But it turned out that they knew somebody at William Morris. And that person at William Morris got it lined up at New Line. The next thing that happened is I get a call from New Line to say, I've got to make a deal with you. You've got the rights, and we want to make a film of it. And so, in fact, we went forward. We made the film, or they made the film. We agreed a deal. They made the film. And then that particular writer got an offer from one of the studios to do a script. And I think they paid him $1 million. And so he was very happy.
Yeah.
What he didn't care about particularly was that they brought in other writers. So it was a committee event on his project.
Yeah.
He said, to hell with that. If I can't write for myself, I'll go off and teach. So he was teaching writing at Columbia University in New York.
Studios are famous for sort of making decisions by committee. I mean, you must have been part of that at some point. Is it generally good or generally bad?
I think it can be good. It's a cover your ass situation, but generally, I think it's good because, you do get it. We would have done that film in New Zealand if we'd had another writer come in and work with the original writer.
I mean, how do you approach making a deal, Gary? Do you charge in like a bull in the china shop and go in hard, or what's your philosophy of the deal?
Well, you could, but frankly, it won't get you anywhere. I've always felt that. I'm going to tell you a story that you may actually have to edit out to the piece, but
there's always the best ones.
I was involved with the early days of the video disc. There were 3 different competing systems. RCA had a system, Philips Pioneer had a system, and JVC had a system. And Thorn EMI in England own a lot of shops, Radio Rentals, Rumbelows, and they would rent television sets through those shops. If you remember the early days of television, there was an obsolescence of the tubes, and they were expensive. You couldn't just get them for a minimum down. You had to put down a third and so on. So a business started in renting television.
Yeah.
JVC came along and said to them, we've now developed this tape player, VHS. Could you rent that? Because they thought that tape, originally, tape recording, would be for gadget freaks.
Mm.
So they made a deal with them to rent VCRs through their shops in England. And in fact, it turned out, rather than gadget freaks, it was factory workers who wanted to record a program that they couldn't see because they were working a night shift, and they could record it and see it the next day. And that was really the big incentive for tape, was to record.
Time shift. Yeah.
Yeah, time shift. So anyway, then they came out with a disc. And so I was in charge of getting product for this disc. I mean, Thorn EMI had product. We had the old Evening Studios product. We had our own libraries and so on. But it was to be competitive, you needed everybody's product. And I used to say to the studios, in recording, you wouldn't just record an artist on a 45, you'd record them on a 45 and a 33 and a 30. You can't just be on one system. You need to be on all the systems. So I was having a meeting at one of the studios with a guy who was known to be a rather bad-tempered son of a bitch. And so I've got a lawyer with me who's very calm, very quiet, not bombastic at all. And we're sitting in the corner office at the studio negotiating the terms under which we would put their product on our disc. And at one stage, the guy from the studio makes a suggestion, and my lawyer friend says, Gary, that's not in our best interest. So the studio guy looks at him and says, shut the fuck up. So we go on, and we're at the next stage. And again, the same thing happens. And the guy jumps out of his chair and says, I thought I told you to shut the fuck up. So my lawyer stands up and says, if you say that to me one more time, I'm going to knock your teeth down your throat.
That's a good meeting.
And we're talking about a hard-nosed negotiation. So the guy from the studio said, I have never been threatened with physical violence in my office before. Maybe been threatened with it outside, but never in the office. So he said, the meeting's over. And I said, this is crazy. We'll meet again in 2 or 3 weeks because we both want to make the deal. So why don't we just take 10 minutes and then come back and continue? And that's, in fact, what we did. They went storming off down the corridor and came back 10 minutes later, and we made the deal. So the reason I'm telling you all of this is that, no, I don't believe in a hard-nosed, slam it, take it or leave it attitude. I would rather take it slowly, gently, and hope that reason will prevail. Because both parties want to make the deal. I mean, it's very seldom that you're making a deal where one party wants to make the deal and the other doesn't. Now, I used to be friendly with a fellow called Sid Sheinberg, who was the head of Universal under Lou Wasserman. And the studios were known for taking advantage in their contracts. And if you had a percentage of the profits, you very seldom got anything.
Yeah.
But they would charge everything against the picture. If a piece of wood had to be carried across the studio, they would charge for the guy doing it, all of those sort of things. So I was talking to Sid, and I said, one of these problems is that people resent the fact that the profits don't materialize very much.
No back end.
He said, yeah. So he said, well, what happens is that when we go to make a deal, I say to the producer, you can bring your lawyers and your uncles and your aunts and your grandparents and everybody you want to make the deal. And that isn't what happens. The producers are so anxious to make the deal, they just say, where can I sign?
Yeah.
They want to jump on it so quickly, they make the deal and sign on it straight away. And he said, of course, we put in the contract everything we can. And nobody negotiates it out because they're so anxious to make a deal. So, it depends. My attitude has always been that two people really want to make a deal, but it should be fair. And we should sit down together and work it out.
And welcome back to Studio Boss, our time with Gary Dartnall, who's been boss of just about everything you can think of. Gary, we've had some questions actually from our viewers. And one of them wants to know about, what are your biggest regrets over your professional life? What do you most regret doing or maybe not doing?
My biggest regret in my professional life. Wow. It's a terribly difficult thing, Peter. I had such a good life, a happy working environment, that it's very hard for me to say I have a regret. I really don't. I got a lot of luck. I had a lot of luck and worked with a lot of really nice people. And how can you regret that?
No, you can't.
I regret anything. It's getting old and having to do less. Okay, there you are. There's a regret. I regret getting old and doing less.
All right, that's a very diplomatic answer. Somebody else wants to know, what film do you wish you'd produced, but you didn't?
Oh, Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh, wow.
I didn't have a
How come?
But I thought it was such a great film that I wish I had produced something as wonderful as that.
Because you did work with David Lean. How come you didn't produce Lawrence?
Well, it was at Columbia, years before, and I wasn't in the picture in those days. I worked with David Lean on Passage to India. Came subsequently, and that was a wonderful experience. He was terrific.
What sort of person was he?
Very, very gentle, very nice. I think earlier in the interview I mentioned to you that he was such a gentleman that he called me and asked me whether we would use Technicolor or Eastman Color.
Yeah.
He was really very nice.
So that's very interesting. So, you think of directors even now, actually. I'm thinking about an image from way back in the era before talkies. All right, I'm thinking about Eric von Stroheim. And you think about directors, and you think about them as sort of maybe slightly Germanic, but very forceful, strong personalities. You go there and you do that. Yeah. What sort of person actually makes the best kind of director?
Well, I think that the best kind of director is the person who works with the artist, because the artist also has a concept of how their particular part is developed and played. And so as a result of that, I think to order them about only creates a bad atmosphere on the set, and you really need, rather, as I described to you, in negotiation, it's so much better if you can agree on a concept. So when the director is a gentle person who can sit with the artist and that they can agree together on character that's being portrayed, and that you get a much better performance from the artist that way.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so from my point of view, I don't believe either in being bombastic in a negotiation or being bombastic on set.
So it sounds like, part of your time you've been a diplomat.
It's just working together. It's a team effort to make a film. It's very tough. And so everybody has to work together with the right spirit, a team spirit.
Now, you weren't just a studio boss. You were running Elstree Studios. You're running EMI Films. You're also running ABC Cinemas, biggest chain of cinemas in the UK. I mean, that sounds like a recipe for high stress. How did you handle that?
I don't know. Maybe I'm lucky. I'm fortunate. I could deal with it. I had some very excellent people who worked with me in each of those departments. Andy Mitchell at Elstree. We had an excellent distribution company run by, excuse me.
Are you being pitched something?
It's the phone, and I don't want to be interrupted, so I took it off the hook.
That's bloody directors again. Yeah.
Yeah, but the various people running different departments were all, I thought, excellent. And we would meet very frequently individually, and once a week we'd all meet together and discuss what we were doing and where we were going. And that took a lot of the stress away. So, yeah, it was okay.
Do you remember what the toughest decision you ever had to take was? Did you ever have to sack someone that you really didn't want to, or something like that?
I think the toughest decision was when Verity Lambert's contract came up for renewal, and I told her we weren't going to renew it. We were going to have a group of producers, a producers group working together, of which she would be one. She would be one of several that would produce for us, and we would put up development money and in exchange for that get first option.
How did she take it?
That they were developing. So that was a difficult situation.
Yeah.
And the guy who'd been running the theatres for us was not that popular with the Thorn group because the theatres had run down when I took over, and that was difficult. They didn't want him to stay in that job, and it wasn't totally his fault. I mean, to keep the theatres up, you have to spend money.
Yeah.
You have to keep them going.
Yeah.
They didn't want to do that because the attendances were down. The revenue was down. So if attendances and revenue were down, it's a vicious circle.
Yeah.
And so I moved him into a different position within the group. And so, we went forward together and we continued to work together because he was a good guy and it wasn't totally his fault that the theatres had gone down.
Are you one of those people who can...
I described to you, people didn't go to them because there were no car parks. It was very inconvenient.
Yeah.
And when people stopped going to them, both Rank and ABC stopped spending money on them. So they deteriorated. There's a vicious circle going down.
Yeah. Are you one of those people who can go home and just switch off completely, or are you always thinking about the next day?
Well, for me in those days, home was here in Los Angeles, and I had a flat in London on Piccadilly and Half Moon Street. And so it was continuous. Yeah. I used to come out in the morning. It was next door to the In-N-Out Club on Piccadilly.
I know it well.
And we had a very nice sort of doorman, Mr. Weeks. And I'd come out in the morning, always in a rush, and I would go up Piccadilly to the business. My office was in Thorn EMI house in St. Martin's Lane. And so as I came out, he would say to me, "Mr. Dartnall, are we taking a taxi today or are we strolling?"
Strolling.
The last thing I would be doing would be strolling. Now, on the other hand, I meet a friend of mine and we stroll.
That makes you sound like Bertie Wooster. He had a place on Piccadilly too, actually, Bertie Wooster did. So just talk about instincts. Instincts are very, very important in this business. You have a nose about something, you have a good feeling about something, or maybe you have a bad feeling about something. Because ultimately, there's an awful lot of the gambling instinct in this, and good people tend to be good at gambling. So, what sort of instinct did you develop for success at its early stage?
One of the things that is happening now is that people are analyzing what will be a successful film. They're looking at past numbers, past performances, and the analytics of all of that, and deciding what would be a successful film. I think it's got to be your reaction.
Yeah.
And if you have a reaction, a gut reaction, that this story will work, this will happen. If you're wrong, you fail and you're out of work. If you succeed, you go on to do other things. But you have to have a desire. And to have a desire, you really need to have a feeling. And to have the feeling, you've got to rely on your instinct.
Yeah, yeah. And have you ever felt really sure about a project, but had to push it through with other people because they just didn't feel the same way?
With Passage to India, John Braben, who was a producer, and I had a situation where we really believed in it. Right? And we had to, I had a bit of a problem with the Thorn board because it was a much bigger budget than they were used to with English films. And so then we had to get a completion guarantor, completion bond. You understand?
Well, explain, tell us what that is actually, Gary, please.
Okay. If you invest in a film, and if there are private investors, they don't want you to come back halfway through production and say, whoops, we spent the money, you have to put some more in to rescue your original investment. So you can get an insurance that the film will be completed. So that makes the investors feel better because they feel that, they're putting their money in and there will be a film at the end of the day. And also, of course, you make arrangements with foreign distributors subject to delivery. You can't deliver if you can't finish the film. And those deals, which may have been discounted at a bank in order to get the money to make the film and all of that. So it's essential, if you're an independent, to get a completion bond. Now, the completion bond companies are most meticulous. They look at your budget and they look at the script, and they have experts who examine the script versus the budget to make sure that you're not saying to them, I can make this film for £10,000 and it really is going to cost £100,000 or whatever. So you have to have that examination done with the completion bond company. Now, when we wanted to get a completion bond on passage to India, remember, I'd had a problem to get the board to agree the budget in the first place.
Yeah.
Completion bond company wanted us to increase the budget by another $1 million. They wanted to do that because it was 14 weeks shoot in India. And, David hadn't made a film since Ryan's Daughter.
All right.
It'd been a number of years.
Yeah.
And he'd gone a bit over budget with that one. So they were concerned about the cost. So we had to sit down with John Braben and David Lean and see what we could do with this. And because it was very hard for me to get another $1 million from the board to go forward with the film. That we all believed, to answer your question, we all believed in the film, but you've got to make it happen. And to make it happen, you've got to get the board to agree to put up the money.
Did you get the impression your neck was on the line?
And so to go back again and get the money was a problem. So in the end, it was agreed that David Lean would be responsible for the first $500,000 of any overruns.
Well, personally?
Yes.
Wow.
And the second half would come from us. Right? Actually, we went out to India for 14 weeks. I didn't go, but the crew went out to India for 14 weeks, where they could have got sick, they could have got ill, everybody could have been delayed and so on. And the only thing that happened was that Peggy Ashcroft twisted her ankle and we lost a day. Apart from that, wow. David came right in on discipline and kept it right on. Now, maybe the fact that he was responsible. Yeah,
it might have had something to do with it.
But whatever it was, you asked me whether we believed in something and had to fight for it. Yes, we believed in that and we had to fight for it, and it was justified at the end of the day.
Yeah. Wow.
I told you, Jeremy Thomas told me that when he was making The Last Emperor, and he had a big problem getting the money for that, and when in the end he won the Academy Award for it, and I said, you must be vindicated. He said, if I'd known how much hard work it was going to be, I'd never have started.
Yeah, really. So I know that you talk a lot to young people who are trying to break into this rather strange business. What's the best advice you've got for a young person? Not necessarily in Los Angeles, maybe in Britain or anywhere, Australia or somewhere else like that these days, bearing in mind how much the business has changed. What's the best advice you can give them?
I think that if anybody wants to be in this business, they have to face the fact that they will have rejection. And you mustn't allow it to affect you. There are so many reasons for rejection. I mean, maybe you've written a wonderful script and you're trying to get somebody interested in it and they're just not interested in that particular subject matter. So you get rejection. Yeah. It doesn't matter. Your script can be brilliant and maybe somebody else will take it up.
Yeah.
maybe an actor and you're up for a part, and the director just doesn't think that you have the look or the right feel for the part, and you get rejected. So you shouldn't be put off by the rejection. It shouldn't be personal. It should be examined as, why was I rejected? If you can find out, if they'll tell you. But generally they don't. So you just pick yourself up and go on. Just keep on going on and accept that that's part of what we're doing in this industry, part of the career, because it's a wonderful life. And part of it, the downside is the fact that you can get rejected from time to time.
Yeah.
Now, from time to time, asked to talk to a group here in Los Angeles of students at the Inner City Film School. This was formed by two editor friends, and they take kids from the inner city and they teach them the crafts, and then they get them intern work at the studios and hopefully launch their career. So I was asked to speak at one of their graduations, and I said to these students, at some stage, at some time, luck will come your way. It happens to all of us. It happened to me at my father's funeral.
Yeah.
So at some stage, luck will come your way. Keep your eyes and your ears open. Seize the day. When it happens, act on it. You never know where it's going to take you. But it will happen. And if you don't, it may never come again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my advice would be, keep your eyes and your ears open and wait. And, when the luck comes, act on it. Yeah. Now, something might happen that you think is lucky and it isn't, but you work on it anyway.
Yeah, totally. That's brilliant advice. That's very, very inspiring, actually, Gary. I want to say thank you so much for being with us these past few minutes. Gary Dartnall, national treasure, actually, or international treasure, really, because you're both sides of the pond. I can see why you've got an OBE. I think it should be a knighthood, personally. Sir Gary sounds good, doesn't it?
Listen, it's a team effort. Don't you know what OBE stands for?
No.
Other buggers' efforts.
Thanks for being with us, Gary.
Thank you, Peter. Bye-bye.